which is the focus of his talk today, called The Truth About Trudeau. He's a long-time political activist, and they say consultant, is that the right word?
Sure.
You know what I figured out about that? Everybody's a consultant. Anybody who thinks about it.
Means I don't have a job.
That, okay. So anyway, with no further ado, would you please welcome Bob Long.
Well, thank you for the introduction, Nick. I really appreciate that. Thank you to Beth for inviting me. And for all of you for being here today on a beautiful pre-Christmas session. Although it's a very boisterous crowd. Have you noticed? Have you noticed? And, you know, there's, I've asked to have a data projector for this session to help with a number of the points that I want to make. Simply because when I talk about Pierre Trudeau and some of the things that he said over his career, before he was Prime Minister and as he was Prime Minister and even after he was Prime Minister, are so unbelievable that unless you saw them in full print, you might not, and I just said them to you, you might not think that I had captured it quite right. So to give you the full Trudeau here, we're going to have both audio and visual this morning. So I'm sure you're all here because you want to know, or you want to confirm what everybody in Canada knows. What everybody in Canada knows is that Pierre Trudeau was Canada's greatest Prime Minister. The greatest of all. Have I come to the wrong session?
Yes!
Well, seriously. I mean, have we not been told by the CBC time and again that Pierre Trudeau is Canada's greatest Prime Minister? Have they not done documentary after documentary on Pierre Trudeau? Has there not been a cottage industry of books about Pierre Trudeau, 13 of which were written by the man himself? And you know, as Winston Churchill used to say, history is going to be very kind to me, for I intend to write it. Could be said about Pierre Trudeau. And you know, why should we not admire Pierre Trudeau? I mean, according to the CBC, he's Canada's third greatest Canadian, after Tommy Douglas and Terry Fox. Well, I have no quarrel with Terry Fox here being the top of the list, but to put Pierre Trudeau over, for example, Sir John A. Macdonald is a bit of a head scratcher. You know, so why is he there? Why is he among all of our prime ministers judged to be the best in opinion poll after opinion poll? Well, certainly he was a man who had style. He had charisma. He had intelligence. He had toughness. And he did have qualities of leadership. And we can say, you know, I can say that I could admire him. For example, in 1968, the night before the 1968 election, when he was on the reviewing stand for the Saint Jean-Baptiste parade that was in Montreal, he had been invited. And from the reviewing stand, some of the protesters and the separatists were throwing rocks and bottles at him on the reviewing stand. And he refused to budge. The security details tried to pull him away, and he shrugged them off and said, I've been invited, I'm staying, and I'm not going to be intimidated by terrorists. And for that, we can have some admiration for him. We knew he was different as a prime minister. When they asked him, you know, Mr. Trudeau, now that you're prime minister, are you going to give up your Mercedes? And he said, my Mercedes. He said, which one? The car or the girl? He said, actually, you know, I'm going to give up none. But who he was, what he believed in, certainly made for a fascinating, colorful, intriguing, provocative time in office. But what about his record? You are not what you say, you are what you do. Surely style is not as important as results. Who he was not as important as what he did. Now, he was in office for 15 and a half years, and he's a man with some accomplishments. He was, you know, on behalf of Canada, gave diplomatic recognition to the People's Republic of China 1 year ahead of the United States. And in Canada, we thought, aren't we special for beating the United States? But of course, this was not a dramatic change in foreign policy, in as much as France, Great Britain, Netherlands, a number of other countries had previously recognized China. He ended the universality of social programs, not really often given credit for that, but targeting social programs to people in greatest need, which is a program and a policy that's survived his predecessors. He was the one who launched the Royal Commission that led to the recommendations for the Canada-US Free Trade Agreement. We could actually say that Pierre Trudeau, in some respects, is the father of the Canada-US Free Trade Agreement. Of course, once it was signed, he called it a monstrous swindle on Canada. He was the Prime Minister. I've heard you talk today about the importance of transparency and about accountability and about access to government and lifting the veil of secrecy that exists within government. And it was, give him credit, Pierre Trudeau, when he was Prime Minister, the one who passed the Access to Information Act and passed the privacy laws. Now, he did that in 1983, the end of 1983, just before he left office. So these were pieces of legislation that did not impugn upon or impinge upon his time in office. And if you think he was a trailblazer for passing Access to Information Act by passing it in 1983, remember this. The United States of America passed their legislation in 1966. So let's give him some credit. Of course, there's a lot of myths about Pierre Trudeau that have been perpetuated by his biographers. They say he was a great environmentalist. We see him on his books with his deerskin jacket and paddling canoes. Of course, Elizabeth May, of all people, would say that Pierre Trudeau was the worst Prime Minister when it comes to environmental record. They say that he was the great immigration Prime Minister. The reality was that immigration levels in Canada under Trudeau declined by 2/3. They say he was a great national leader, a great Liberal leader. The fact is, Pierre Trudeau lost every single election he fought outside, after 1968 outside the province of Quebec. He lost every election he fought, and he lost them badly to Bob Stanfield and to Joe Clark by a margin of 2-1. So how do you lose outside of Quebec by a margin of 2-1 in this country, yet hold power for 4 or 5 elections with 3 majority governments? The reality, ladies and gentlemen, is that he won because he won 83% of all of the seats in the province of Quebec over 5 elections. 83%. You don't have to win very many seats outside of the province of Quebec in order to hold government when you've got that kind of turnout. And why wouldn't they have supported him in Quebec? He's a native son. He certainly passed out a lot of money to Quebec. There's no question about that in terms of regional economic development. They love the unemployment insurance reforms, and of course he passed the Official Bilingualism Act, and so very much he was supported in Quebec, and that was his key to victory. They say Pierre Trudeau inspired the country, that he lifted us up. You would think, I struggled with that, because I read all the biographies on Trudeau. I said, well, what's the evidence that he really inspired the nation? You would think if there was one piece of evidence, it would be voting turnout. If we really loved the guy, would we not have gone out to vote for him? The reality is that in the 2 elections before Pierre Trudeau was Liberal leader, and in the 2 elections after he left, voter turnout was higher. It was actually lower during the 5 elections when Pierre Trudeau was leader. Now, they say he was a great Liberal, but reality is that he showed no loyalty whatsoever to the Liberal Party of Canada. John Turner said he did everything possible to undermine his success as Liberal leader in all sorts of ways. So, I've got to say, now myths are interesting, but the ultimate test of any Prime Minister are 3, what I consider to be 3 overarching issues. We should put to any Prime Minister, from Sir John A. Macdonald right up to Stephen Harper, we should put them to this test. What impact do they have on our economic prosperity? Positive or negative? What impact do they have on our place in the world, our national security, our defense, our relations around the world? And the third main test is national unity. Did they draw the country together in common purpose? Now, in the case of the economy, Pierre Trudeau was rather proud of his record. In his memoirs, this is after he left office, he said, in the case of the economy, Canada was as healthy when I left office as any of our major competitors and was probably ahead in many respects. So this is the liberal line, that Canada, basically, we held our own during the time that Pierre Trudeau was in power. We held our own, we did not fall behind. We were a product of our times, he says and they say. Now, we should keep in mind that when Pierre Trudeau assesses his economic record, he does so not only as a trained economist, which he was, having studied at Harvard and the London School of Economics at Sorbonne, and he did a PhD, or didn't quite finish it, but he also studied at Harvard, politics and economic matters. So indeed, he's had more academic training in economics than any of his predecessors and any of his successors, Stephen Harper included. So he knows what he's talking about when he talks about the economy. This is his area of interest. As an academic, Pierre Trudeau wrote of his view of Canada and his view of society. He said, I want a classless society. We're not talking about, just being poorly mannered here when he says classless. We're talking here about all of us being equal. We are going to build socialism here. There is no alternative to socialism, he said. Socialism is the only true form of democracy. He seemed, on economic matters, not to be bothered by the consequences of government debt or government spending. In fact, on government debt, he said at the first sign of national economic weakness, the Bank of Canada could always print more money without any inconvenience when needed. To him, putting debt onto your children or onto the wealthy, I guess he thought at some point in time if it got so bad they would just tax the rich, was not something that he considered very seriously. It was not even an inconvenience. Now you might say these were the musings of a roving intellectual and an academic of sorts. But even in his memoirs, Pierre Trudeau wrote in his memoirs, he wrote of his view of politics and his view of economics, that his view was set for life when he finished the London School of Economics. And it was on the basis of this understanding, these views, that all of his political and economic decisions were made. Now, even when he was in office, he never disavowed his view of socialism. He didn't talk about it so much. Again,